Yo, it's the Sporting Tribune today. Adrian Hernandez here in Las Vegas, of course. In today's episode, highly focused on football. And here's the deal. You should know by now, the Sporting Tribune covers the West Coast, all sports. But when it comes to football specifically, we kind of got two opposite ends of the spectrum. Later on in the episode, we'll be checking in with Josh Fisher, who covers USC football for us. And look, it's been some craziness happening over there, all right? There's been no defense played. A defensive coordinator's been fired. Lincoln Riley has more excuses. Caleb Williams wants to cuddle with dogs. But then here in Las Vegas, they kind of already did some firing. GM's out. Josh McDaniels is out. A new Compton head coach is here for the Raiders, and they're super excited. So we'll bring in our guest right now from Bleacher Report. Also covers the Raiders for Odyssey, the Silver and Black Today podcast, where you should check out wherever you get your podcasts. Mo and joins us. Mo, how are you, my friend?
It's a brand new day in New York City. It's a brand new day in Las Vegas. RWA, Raiders with attitude. I don't know if you saw that posted on the official X handle of the Raiders, but posted a picture of Devontae Adams, some Raiders, and R.W.A. Raiders with attitude. I like the attitude they came out with against the Giants. Yes, I know the Giants are a dumpster fire. They're terrible. Arguably the worst team in the league. They had Tommy DeVito, their third-string quarterback, out there. I don't care because guess what? The Raiders played a 2-7 Bears team and got squashed 2 weeks ago. So tell me, is there a difference between that Raider team that got squashed by a 2-7 team and the Raiders team that did the squashing to a 2-7 team this past Sunday? I think so.
No, there definitely is a difference. And by the way, we cannot bypass this before we get into everything. Is this why the all-black look looks phenomenal? Is this the new Raiders attitude right now?
This is the new RWA. This is definitely. I should have came on here with my chain on to complete the look. That's my apologies for that. But I usually get on here with two chains. I should have came on with the two chains to just put the period, put the exclamation point in the bow on the new Raiders attitude. But next time you have me on, I definitely will have those chains on.
Look, I respect it. And for those that I hope follow me personally, you should know, well, Mo Moton's actually been on the show before, so this isn't his first time. Now officially a friend of the Sporting Tribune today, but also with my other responsibilities here in Las Vegas, we talk a lot. And Mo, before we get into things like a first date, the thing should be let the other person talk about themselves and they'll think the date's fine because everyone loves talking about themselves. So I'm going to do that. We did a season preview, my friend. You along with your co-host, Scott Gobranson, were looking at me kind of crazy when I was like, hey, guys, kind of have the worst quarterback in the division. You guys are talking about Jimmy G throwing for 30 touchdown passes and Josh Jacobs going close to 2,000 yards. We kind of didn't sign anybody on the offensive line. And, hey, that defense has one guy and a whole bunch of dudes that worked at a In-N-Out here locally in Las Vegas, and that's kind of who we got on defense. And look what happened. Can I get a champion? I'm doing a champion's pose, and can I get some credit, please? Because I saw this happening.
You did. Although I didn't say 30 touchdowns. I said maybe he gets to 30. Maybe he has a career high 30. If he continues,
I got the tape,
if he stays healthy.
Be careful. I got the tape.
If he stays healthy. But, obviously that didn't happen. Jimmy Garoppolo is the worst quarterback in the division. I think Scott and I said he could be the third best if Russell Wilson is still the Russell Wilson of last year. Russell Wilson is actually showing some improvement. It's not the same Russell Wilson we saw in Seattle, but it's clear that Jimmy Garoppolo, you're right, is the worst quarterback in the division, and that's why they had to bench him for Aiden O'Connell. I think fans were calling for Aiden O'Connell 2-3 weeks ago. Jimmy Garoppolo, his interceptions, we call him Jimmy Gimmies on Silver and Black Today, Scott and I, and he just threw one too many Jimmy Gimmies as a starter. I believe at one point last week before week 9, he led the league in interceptions and he had missed 2 games. So the interception rate was just ridiculous. And they had to make the decision and they had to move on with Aiden O'Connell. And I think Aiden O'Connell had a pretty good second showing as a starter. Now, does he have room to grow? Absolutely. But it's a lot better than what we saw with Jimmy Garoppolo.
I mean, hell, he had a good showing the first time he went out there. Granted, I know he threw that interception late, but hey, he kept them in the game. You know what I'm saying? They had a chance to win at the end, which is what all you can ask for. Really quick, before we we move on to what just happened with the Giants, and obviously we're at the halfway point of the season, so we got to get into some predictions to see how this plays out with the new regime. I do just want to ask you, what you think of McDaniels finally being fired. I think it's safe to say that we're kind of surprised that it happened in season. Um, in one way, I know fans were clamoring for it. A lot of people were. I was. We saw all the viral videos of not paparazzi, but just fans pleading with Mark Davis to please fire him anytime he was out in public. But what you make of the firing?
I wish I had spoke to you before the trade deadline, because I don't know if anyone watching this saw this, but I was on my Bleach Report Live the day of the trade deadline, and a lot of people were asking me, why didn't the Raiders make any moves, either trading for players or trading players out, i.e. Hunter Renfrow? And I said I had a theory that the reason the Raiders stood pat is because they're going to dump Josh McDaniels before the 2024 season. He's not going to survive this season as a head coach. So what they're going to do is run it back with basically the core guys that they have, and just have a new head coach in there. And lo and behold, Tuesday, after they lost to the Detroit Lions, they fired Josh McDaniels. Now, there are a lot of things that led into that. We'll talk about that. But at the beginning of the season, I said Josh McDaniels probably gets a third year. But when you watch the Raiders offense and how bad it was with the players that they had, you had to believe that Mark Davis was getting impatient. And I said this before, owners don't like to see their teams embarrassed on national TV. So the Raiders go out, they get embarrassed against Chicago in Chicago. Now, that wasn't nationally televised. It was an early game. No one, outside of Bears and Raiders fans, a lot of people didn't watch that game. I get it. But then you get embarrassed on Monday Night Football against a good Detroit Lions team. But I think it's more about how the Raiders perform. Again, not scoring more than 21 points in an eighth straight game. And you have your starting quarterback, Jimmy Garoppolo, who looks like the worst quarterback in the league. So I think Mark Davis looked at that, and he probably thought about all the fans, as you said, that were screaming at him or pleading with him to fire Josh McDaniels. And he's probably thinking, well, it looks like they're right. I got to fire this dude. And as I said, there are a lot of things that led up to it that factored into that decision, but it was absolutely the right decision. I'm not totally surprised after the first half season results, but I will say that it was overdue.
And to not jump ahead completely, but I do need to touch base on this too. Of course, I think the news of all the pregame shows across all of the NFL networks was the report about the meeting that the Raiders had, where it got a little defensive with the Giants and Patriots rivalry. And full transparency, we are working on trying to get Jay Glazer and Ian Rappaport on the show. Hopefully we can make that happen. Requests have been sent. Stay tuned. But with the report and everything that's come out, just what do you make of that chaos? And does that change? And okay, so now this is going to branch out. Does that change your opinion on Josh McDaniels? And something that I've seen that if you want to touch on, or if you don't want to touch on it, it's okay. It's up to you. But does this even change the way that you view Derek Carr or some of the things that happened last year with Josh McDaniels, now that we see what's kind of happened?
First of all, I want to say it doesn't change my opinion of Josh McDaniels, because I was skeptical of him to begin with. I was wondering, did he learn from his mistakes in Denver? And it's clear that he did not. He still struggles with building bonds and relationships and rapport with his players and coaches. And that's why they called him out. And also, he has a problem with self-accountability. I talked about it during the season. When he steps to the microphone at these press conferences, it's always, well, the defense did this. We couldn't execute with 4 or 5 plays away. He never said, well, I need to make better play calls. I. It was always they, we, them. And I think as a head coach, as a leader of a football team, you have to take on that responsibility of self-accountability, because even if it's not entirely your fault, you are the leader of that operation as the offensive play caller and head coach. So I think I'm not surprised. I did say give Josh McDaniels a chance to show that he learned from his mistakes, but it's clear that he didn't from that meeting. What I will say about the Derek Carr situation is the whispers that Derek Carr was handcuffed in the offense because he wasn't allowed to make changes at the line of scrimmage ring true right now, because if you watch that game against the Giants, Aiden O'Connell was making checks and changes at the line of scrimmage, which we haven't seen from any of the Raiders quarterbacks in the first 8 weeks of the season under Josh McDaniels. So it's very clear that Josh McDaniels has a mentality of, I call the plays, you run the plays that I call, don't change much of what I'm doing. And I think part of that is why Derek Carr has such a poor season. Now, I also think it was time to move on from Derek Carr. But when you look at it and you look back in retrospect, he had his worst season under Josh McDaniels. Jimmy Garoppolo is having his worst season under Josh McDaniels. Brian Hoyer has always been awful, but he was even more awful against the Bears when they thought that he was the safe option to not turn the ball over. He not only turns the ball over, but has a pick six. So none of these quarterbacks are performing well in Josh McDaniels' system, whatever that is. So I think not that it gives credits to Derek Carr's, the Derek Carr supporters out there who say, see, we should have stuck with Derek Carr. But I think there's something to say about Derek Carr having his worst year when you have a head coach and offensive play caller who's so rigid as Josh McDaniels is.
Also, he hasn't been, they ain't scoring 50 points over there in New Orleans, too. So calm down, everybody. I just wanted to bring it up.
They're also struggling in the red zone. Taysom Hill is the elixir for the Saints in the red zone. He's been running the ball, catching the ball, and throwing the football in the red zone. Derek Carr struggled in the red zone, so let's be clear about that one.
It's kind of fascinating to see, like you just said, he's struggling to attach himself to personalities when it comes to Josh McDaniels and the team, and not just being the head coach and kind of being robotic. And every NFL team is a fancy word. I'm not going to be able to pronounce it. But, it's like a military, like you're going into military camp. It's like boot camp, right? Everything, there's structure, especially when it comes to Bill Belichick. And it's just fascinating to see the success that they had and how that's possible when some of these things truly weren't there. But much credit to the talent that was on those rosters. But now let's move on to what's actually going on. So Raider Nation is finally happy. It's been a minute, man. It has been a minute since they've been happy. Antonio Pierce is here. The new regime, the new attitude. We smoking cigars like we won the Super Bowl in the locker room after beating the Giants' ass. Your reaction to the early, less than 2 weeks in to this new regime that's in place, at least for now?
I think it's a breath of fresh air. If you've worked at a company or a place where you felt like management wasn't using you to your best ability, you felt like the company was, or the organization or the place you worked was just dragging along because the manager didn't realize the talent that he had in the room, you understand the breath of fresh air and the release that the Raiders had once they fired Josh McDaniels. Now, professionally, to the media, they're going to tell you, we're not celebrating Josh McDaniels getting fired or losing his job, but they are celebrating a fresh new chapter with Coach Pierce. It's very clear because people were making fun of the Raiders for saying, oh, they're lighting cigars for beating the 2-7 Giants. I'll say, I'm not here for the celebration police. Whatever makes you happy after you had a stressful 2 months working wherever you are, do whatever you want. Have a drink, have a cigar, enjoy yourself. I'm not going to be the celebration police, but I will say the cigar was more than just them beating the Giants. Again, it was about starting a new chapter. It was said that Antonio Pierce handed out blank sheets of paper to all the players and said, this is your fresh start. You're starting with a blank slate. And I think that means a lot. It sounds corny, but I think that the little things all add up. Him handing out those blank sheets of paper, the way he yells, Raiders, after a win in the locker room with his victory speech, the fact that he brought the practice squad on the sideline to watch the game on Sunday and treated them like, first-class players instead of second-class humans. I think all of the little stuff like that adds up. So while people are downplaying this win against the Giants, pay attention to the little things he's doing to add camaraderie and rally that locker room, because it means something to those players after being under Josh McDaniels, who was more of a corporate business situation. I think the players are finally clicking in with their head coach, and that's a good thing.
You know what else is a good thing when it comes to the celebration and you being like, you're not going to be the celebration police? I love that, of course, these teams play in Las Vegas, and the Raiders know how to celebrate, and the Las Vegas Aces sure as hell know how to celebrate. So good job, Mark Davis. You got players that know how to turn up. Just turn up responsibly. And now let's get into some predictions, because, everybody's happy, but it was the Giants, not one of the greatest teams in the league. And hell, the Raiders themselves aren't one of the greatest teams in the league. And even when we look at recent memory, Rich Bisaccia, of course, leads the team to the playoff game. There's still some fans like that phantom whistle. We could have been the Bengals and made it to the Super Bowl. And a lot of people pointed fingers to well, what if they would have kept him? So now This is kind of like, again, I'm sorry, branches to this question like a tree. How do you see the rest of the season playing out? Is the team going to finish with a losing record? Even if they come close to 500 and finish the season around 500, do you think Antonio Pierce has a legitimate shot to become not the interim head coach, but the actual head coach of this team moving forward?
I'll start by saying this. I think Antonio Pierce has a legit shot. But as I have a piece up, it's actually already up on Sportsnot that he has a simple yet narrow path to being the full-time head coach because he's not a play caller, defense or offense. He has to worry about the bottom line. So the Raiders have to win, in my opinion, 9 games and or make the playoffs for him to have a real shot to hold on to that full-time position. Will they do that? I don't think so. Unfortunately, I get the whole excitement around him. Seems like a great leader, but he took over a team that was 3-5, and he has a rookie quarterback, and he has a first-time offensive coordinator. All of that adds up, and you still have to play the Chiefs twice. You got the Dolphins, who are going to be coming off of a bye week in week 11, so they're going to have extra time to prepare for the Raiders. You're gonna have the Chargers again. Those games are always close. So the Raiders' schedule, I
Both
would
Chiefs
say,
games.
right, and both, as I said, both Chiefs games, one of them on Christmas. So the Raiders' schedule is going to get a bit tougher very soon after the Jets, and that's not even a gimme game because the Jets have beaten the Buffalo Bills and the Philadelphia Eagles with Zach Wilson under center. They're the only team to beat the Philadelphia Eagles. So while the Jets looked awful against the Chargers on Monday, just a reminder, they're the only team to beat the Eagles with Zach Wilson, so don't overlook them. So it's going to be a tough road. And as I said, with a rookie quarterback and a first-time offensive play caller, I think the Raiders finished just short of a playoff spot. I think they're going to win 7 games. I'll give them 8 if there's an upset here or there. Who knows? Because you got to factor that in. There are injuries. But I think 7-8 games is where the Raiders land, and I think it's just short of him getting a serious shot at the head coaching position because, as I said, I think it has to be 9 wins or more and or playoffs for Antonio Pierce to keep that job. Because if you look at the landscape right now, most teams are hiring former play callers. So offensive play callers at the top of the list. If your team is scoring, top 5 in scoring, that offensive play caller, guys like Ben Johnson, Shane Steichen last year, those guys are going to get jobs. Even defensive coordinators are still getting called for jobs. I believe Dan Quinn is going to be a guy that you're going to hear a lot about too. So as a CEO type head coach, because Antonio Pierce isn't calling plays, he can't point to the offense or point to the defense and saying, that's my top 10 unit. For him, it's a slim pathway because he just has to look at the bottom line. As a head coach, what is your team's finishing record? And if it's 7-10 or 8-9, he's probably not going to get the job.
When it comes to Aiden O'Connell, do you see him finishing out the season as the starter for the rest of the season?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because at this point, if Jimmy Garoppolo gets hurt during the season, the Raiders are going to be on the hook for another $11.5 million, I believe, next year. So you don't play Jimmy Garoppolo unless you really have to, i.e., Aiden O'Connell looks absolutely awful or he gets hurt. And you're not putting Brian Hoyer back out there no matter what. I'd rather sign Carson Wentz than put Brian Hoyer back out on the field, just be honest with you. But that's a whole nother subject for another day. I think Aiden O'Connell is the starter going forward for the remainder of the season simply because see what you have, because this is going to be possibly a loaded draft class coming up in 2024. You find out what Aiden O'Connell is. Is he a high-level backup? Is he a low-level starter? Is he a future starter? So you got to find out what he has and what he could be before you make a decision in the 2024 draft about your quarterback position.
And this is probably the most fascinating question. Okay, so we discussed why the deadline moves didn't happen, and we assume that because they knew that bigger changes were coming.
Exactly.
So we still have these pieces. I've talked about it ad nauseum. I believe the 5th highest rated offensive cap in terms of how expensive this offense is. And we still have these pieces here, other than Josh Jacobs, who next, he signed a 1-year deal this season. So he's free to go to wherever he wants next year. Whether Antonio Pierce stays with the Raiders or a new regime comes in, or in a new GM, or they keep Champ Kelly, like however this plays out, whether this regime stays in place or a new one comes in, does the trajectory of this team now change in terms of being contenders or giving this new regime time to to put in the roster? Like, where are we at with that right now?
I think right now, speaking to you today, the trajectory is pointing up because you would hope that Devontae Adams is happy, Max Crosby is happy, and you have your two cornerstone roster pieces, right? On both sides of the ball. We'll see what happens with Josh Jacobs if free agency is going to boil down to what the head coach wants and how much money he's going to get on the market. But I would say it all boils down to Mark Davis. He's going to have the ultimate decision in the offseason about what to do with his head coaching position. And what he does with the head coaching and GM positions is going to dictate what the Raiders are going to look like for the next maybe 3 to 5 years, you hope. Because you don't want another firing within another 2 years, right? So you're thinking, okay, his next hire is a 3 to 5 year plan, right? So if he has a bad hire, if it's a Josh McDaniels like hire, it's going down the toilet, and Devontae Adams is probably going to want out. If he makes a decent hire that the players actually can get behind, that Devontae Adams and Max Crosby and even Josh Jacobs, who's going to hit free agency, can believe in and say, okay, I see the vision. Then the arrow is definitely pointing up, and all those guys stay, and you have leaders sticking in your locker room, and you're just adding pieces through the draft and then free agency, because the Raiders, I believe, are top 10, top 8 in free agency money next year. So they're going to have the resources to add on to what they already have. But as I said, Mark Davis hasn't shown the ability yet to make a home run hire. Even John Gruden, who improved the team incrementally year to year, look at his draft classes. The Raiders squandered multiple first-round picks under the John Gruden regime. So while they made small steps in the right direction, eventually made the playoffs without him, by the way, that team wasn't built to sustain any type of success because of the poor draft picks that they had in the first round. So they need a GM and head coach who's not only going to uplift the Raiders' draft history, because we all know the track record isn't good, but also bring those players in and develop them. Because I'm seeing players, former Raiders elsewhere, have some success. Jahad Ward with the Giants is a pretty solid player right now. I know Damon Arnett isn't anything, and Alex Leatherwood flamed out. But I'm seeing Mo Hurst is a guy I'm seeing now in Cleveland making plays. So the Raiders have to be able to not only draft well, but have the coaching staff to develop the players that they have. And if they do that, you'll finally start to see the Raiders string together back-to-back in consecutive playoff appearances.
Momo, and before you get out of here, please get your plugs in.
Silver and Black today. Scott Branson and I are the hosts there. We're out every Tuesday and Thursday, 9 p.m. Eastern Time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Bleacher Report Lives come on Wednesdays from 4 to 7. I usually have the exact time out. I post it on the X every Wednesday. This next Wednesday, it'll be 5 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific. Sports Night, I have a Raider column there every week. Stay tuned for that. Sometimes I have a Silver and Black Blitz without Scott, with just Cousin Mo, just giving you the realness for the Raiders usually. I'll definitely have one on Antonio Pierce coming up soon. Look out for that one.
There it is, Momo, and thank you so much. And there it is. This was the positive portion of the show. Now we head to Los Angeles. When it comes to the Trojans, we got some problems, ladies and gentlemen. This is the Sporting Tribune today.